A warm welcome to all the viewers of Embassy Direct, especially to the foreign diplomatic and expatriate communities and the members of our network. Embassy Direct is a responsible media platform focused in delivering the good news. Taking into consideration the challenges that our planet has faced during the past 18 months, Embassy Direct wants to emphasize in its philosophy of delivering the good news and has created a new segment. We will be engaging with different role players of our society who will be sharing their life experiences and how, through their actions, they are making a difference within their community. Our first guest in this series of interviews is Dr. Anthony Turton. Good day, Dr. Turton. How are you?
Good day to you and the listeners. Thank you for linking up with me.
Great. It's a pleasure having you here. And I will start with a series of questions, if you allow me, Dr. Turton.
By all means.
Kindly describe your organization and the role you play within it.
Don't have one organization. I have multiple organizations. I have become an omnivore, an intellectual omnivore in my life, by virtue of the fact that I've grown up in a country of great transition and great change. And so I sit on the board of a number of companies. And I also hold a professorship at the University of Free State in the Centre for Environmental Management. And I'm also a founding member of the South African Business Water Chamber, where we are propagating the idea that water is an economic enabler, and we're trying to roll out water infrastructure as part of a reconstruction and development project in South Africa. Sorry, I can't hear you. You were muted. I couldn't hear anything you said.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Kaylin, we're going to start again. Sorry.
If you don't have to restart the entire thing. If you'd like, you can just have a short pause and then carry on, and I can edit it out.
Okay, so what we're gonna delete is where he wasn't hearing.
Yes.
So I'm gonna go directly to the next question.
Perfect, no problem.
Thanks, Doctor. South Africa has had a challenging 18 months. How is your organization making a positive difference? Please mention how others can get involved and support your efforts.
Yes, we've had a challenging 18 months, but I'm a 12th generation South African, and we've had a challenging 12 generations. It's part of our nature. It's part of what we do. I think sometimes we are a little bit impatient with this experiment in democracy in South Africa. We're a young democracy, and we're bound to make mistakes, and we're bound to learn from those mistakes. So the last couple of months, yes, have been very, very trying times, but I firmly believe that we are going to be learning from those experiences. On a commercial side, my company invests heavily into South African-based engineering, science, and technology. In fact, we develop leading edge science, engineering, and technology into industrial processes. And of course, on the academic side as well, we've still got a fair amount of depth of knowledge in South Africa. So I'm very, very happy to work with the South African younger generation, because their entire life has been one of uncertainty, and that uncertainty has given them a unique capability that is in fact in short supply in the rest of the world, because the rest of the world is used to a steady state operation. But in South Africa, we are very, very used to this whole adaptive kind of situation, you know, where things are not necessarily always predictable as we would like them to be.
Thanks. Charity or empowerment? Which one do you think should be an NGO's drive, and why?
This is a very interesting conversation, and it's very close to my heart. If you look at the current model, it's about giving poor people grants, giving poor people charity. I personally think that is fundamentally flawed. I don't think you will ever alleviate poverty by doing that. I think the best thing to do is to create an enabling environment for people to earn a reasonable wage, at a living wage, better than a living wage, based on their productivity, based on their output. And if a person can sustain themselves by dignified employment, I think that is probably the easiest way out of poverty. And I give an example of that. My grandfather was a squatter. So my grandfather was left destitute as a small boy after the Anglo-Boer War, and he was unable to get employment. He was literally destitute. And as a result of that, my father grew up in abject poverty and unable to get an education. So in my own personal family history, just in the last few generations, we've witnessed the impact of that intergenerational poverty. And in the turmoil of the 1960s, early 1960, 61, at the time of the Sharpeville uprising in South Africa, when there was suddenly a loss of investor confidence in the country, and the prices of real estate fell to record lows. At that moment in time, for the first time, my father was able to afford to buy a house. Before that, he was unable to buy a house. And once he was given that opportunity to buy a house, it just became a life-changing experience, because for the first time now, we could leverage real estate, for access to credit, for access to capital, etc. And he became a very successful businessman, retired fairly young as a very successful businessman. But that life-changing event was when I was 5, 6 years of age, the Sharpeville crisis, where literally that moment of crisis enabled my family to turn. Is about education. It's about giving a hope for a better future, a vision, but creating an enabling environment for people to leverage their own skills, that they can now manage debt properly and work their way out of poverty of that. So this is my view, and my whole life has been shaped by that particular series of events.
How can excellent leadership in South Africa improve the country's perception globally, and how do you foresee this helping citizens?
South Africa has had examples of outstanding leadership in the past in a number of fields. So when I was a small boy, I was completely inspired by Dr. Chris Barnard, who became a South African pioneer. And in fact, up until then, the lifespan of an individual, any living organism, the lifespan was determined by the number of beats that their heart could have. And when their heart stopped beating, then their life came to an end. Well, Chris Barnard chose to think differently about that. And he dared to ask a question that nobody else had asked. And I think this is the remarkable thing about South Africans. We had, for example, during the period of transition to our democracy, the leadership of Nelson Mandela, which was very, very transformational, very visionary. So I would say that leadership is about being visionary, about giving people a vision of hope, a vision of a better future, not this division and this doom and gloom and all of the disruption that you generally see in the politics of populism that tends to plague the planet today. So I see visionary leadership as giving creating the ability to build a vision and to build consensus across all segments of society around that big vision. And in fact, I've learned a very, very important lesson in my life. And the lesson that I've learned was a person can live for weeks without food, for days without water, but not for a moment without hope. So I think hope is one of the most critical ingredients of any visionary leadership. And this, I think, is what's the missing element that we have in large parts of the world today, but particularly in South Africa at this moment in time.
You mentioned hope. Have you got hope for South Africa's future? And if you do, why? And how do we translate this hope into every corner of the country?
Yes, I'm very bullish about South Africa's future. And the reason why I'm bullish is because I am a 12th generation African. My original relative came to South Africa as a refugee from Europe, refugee from the 30 Years' War between the Protestants and the Catholics in Germany. In fact, my oldest relative came from a place near Cologne, present-day Cologne on the Rhine River. And the village that he was born into was eventually razed to the ground, destroyed, literally completely destroyed. And he became a soldier. He was a flintlock rifleman. And he joined the Dutch East India Company and came out to South Africa with Jan van Riebeeck. So his whole vision was to come to this place at the tip of the African continent, to build, to construct, to bring hope, to bring modernization, to bring development. So these are the visions that my family's had for 12 generations. And those 12 generations have very often been punctuated by bad events. The smallpox of the 1700s, for example, became a life-changing event for large parts of my family. Many lost their lives, but others picked up afterwards and moved forward. So I understand the way that economies evolve and the way that nations grow. It's not a linear straight line from point A to point B. It's punctuated by periods of instability and periods of uncertainty. And this is where you have to dig deep in yourself as a person. This is where you forge your relationships as a nation. This is where you really become part of something bigger than yourself. And that's part of my core philosophy. As an individual, I'm completely irrelevant. I'm completely insignificant, but I'm not irrelevant. My relevance is derived from being part of a greater whole. And that has come from 12 generations of this continuous experiment in improving, in betterment, in science, engineering, technology, and advancement of knowledge, and the creation of a dream in which everyone can reach their full potential.
Dr. Turton, you mentioned something important. Our world, our history is actually a culture of immigrants. If we go back history, it's groups of people that move from one place to the other. And eventually they become part of the identity of that place. How do we align our immigration policies to our socioeconomic challenges? Currently, 86% of the informal sector is owned by foreigners, whilst 3/4 of our youth is unemployed. How do we face this?
Yes, we are certainly all immigrants. We are all migrants. In fact, I'm a water resource specialist, and what amazes me is that the older I get and the more I contemplate water as an enabler and water as an essential element for civilization and for economic development, I also notice refugee flows are exactly the same. People flow like water. They will from where they pushed out of places that are in turmoil, in crisis, and they will be drawn into places where there's opportunity and stability. So people like water flow, but so does capital. Capital also flows. And now you can't force capital to go into a specific place, and you can't force people to go into a specific place. You have to create an enabling environment, just like you can't stop the flow of a river by building a dam. Eventually that dam will fill up and ultimately it will overflow. And if you don't design it properly, it will fall down and break. So these are all sort of philosophical things that I've learned about in my life. But yes, we have a quintessential problem. In fact, it's a planetary problem that we don't want to grasp. My view, this is my professional opinion now as a scientist, as a thinker, is that we have reached a point on our planetary existence as a species where our future is dependent on us being able to cooperate at the highest possible level. And yet at the very same time, our ability to cooperate is being eroded. It's never been worse than it is today. And part of that is social media that has amplified everyone's opinion about very complex issues and given them a voice, mostly a negative voice about what should be done or ought to be done or could be done, when they don't actually have a clue about what the underlying drivers are. So I think the human race at the moment is faced with an existential crisis. Crisis of climate, a crisis of economics, crisis of distribution of privilege in society, etc. And South Africa is really just a microcosm of that global arena in which it's playing out. So we are a species that has survived by experimentation. We're a species that has evolved over time by cooperating. And it's our ability to cooperate, our ability to reach out across divides. That has always been our finest moment. And that has always been the moment that we've managed to dig ourselves out of the darkness of a trench and go to some other a better place, where we can all, reach some other degree of aspiration. So I'm actually a very inherently an optimistic person, and I think this comes down to the fact that as a 12th generation African, I identify so much with the African continent. I am an African. I am as much an African as any other African leader, and in fact, I find it very, very interesting that history is such an emancipatory thing, because the Zulu nation, for example, just as one of the many nations in South Africa, was only formed at the Battle of Gokli Hill, but in April 1818, between the Ndwandwe and the Mthethwa people. So the Zulu nation that we know today has only been formed from 1818 until today. And yet my culture, where I come from, we've called ourselves African since 1652. So in other words, the whole idea of the depth of your culture, and the whole idea about how do you identify and where you come from, what are you, what is your DNA, what gives you the right to claim that you are part of that place. This is something that lies very, very close to my heart. And I'm thinking of writing a book in my old age called How Many Bones Do We Need to Bury Before We Can Call Ourselves an African? Because I'm the custodian of my family's history, and I know exactly what's happened over those 12 generations. And we've buried many bones of my families in Africa. We are of Africa. We are African.
You mentioned something very close to your heart, Dr. Turton: water. Water is an element that people do not cherish as we should. Climate change has become a very big issue in our lives. We are taking for granted the fact that everything that surrounds us will be there forever. We even believe ourselves as being eternal. What is your advice to people about saving water, about really taking care about this precious resource?
I've got some very deep views about water, because that is my specialization. I came to water as a national security issue. So my insight into water comes from water as an existential threat to the existence of the state, and that's my sort of my unique aspect, if you like, on water. And what's interesting now is that water is something that moves around the planet in time and space. Technically, it's known as a flux. A flux moves in time and space. The volume of water we have on the planet today is the same volume of water that we had when the dinosaurs roamed free. We've entered into a time of our evolutionary period where Homo sapien, human beings, have so fundamentally altered our ecosystems that we're now also impacting on the hydrological cycle. And wherever you go in the world, there are forest fires, and there are droughts, and there's pestilence, and there's all kinds of unpleasant things happening. And all of that is to do with the way that we have disturbed the planet. And of course, there's a big argument about did human beings impact it, and the whole denialist thing, which I'm not part of. That's part of a counter movement that is actually taking us back into the Dark Ages, not taking us forward into a period of enlightenment. The important thing about water is that water is an infinitely renewable resource. And therefore, because it moves in time and space, if we attract enough capital and enough technology into water, water can become a major economic enabler. And in fact, if you look in South Africa at the moment, we have to spend 1 trillion rand is what is required for our infrastructure upgrade just to repair what's broken. And if you take a very, very conservative multiplier of 5, any well-planned engineering project of that nature, or infrastructure project, will give you a multiplier. And that multiplier we can conservatively estimate as being 5, assuming we don't steal the money, assuming that it's invested correctly, and that we build value, something of enduring value. Then we can turn that 1 trillion rand into 5 trillion rand worth of capital floating around the country, creating jobs, enabling people to work their way out of poverty by creating skills, etc. The important thing is that we've only run out of the 2% of the total volume of water on the planet that happens to be fresh water. There we've reached the limit of that availability, because as a species, we have outgrown the carrying capacity of the planet. So there we've got a population crisis, a population problem, and that is politically untenable. People don't like to talk about that. No politician will ever go down that route to talk about what we must do about population dynamics. But that is a reality. So do we have a doom and gloom scenario because we've run out of water and we now are going into a state of decline? I say no, it's not like that at all. What we're standing before now is we're on the literal threshold of a major new breakthrough where capital and technology comes together. For example, the desalination of seawater. 2/3 of the planet is seawater. And in fact, I would redefine the problem as saying that we don't have a water problem. We have a salt problem and a pollution problem and a problem in terms of our inability to think creatively. That's our problem. That's our crisis. It's not really a water crisis. It's more a crisis of innovative thinking and the ability to create investment models that attract capital and technology and retain skills and grow economies, etc., rather than self-enrichment. So that's the vision that I have with water, and that's what we're doing at the SA Business Water Chamber. We are deeply involved with the presidency and with the Treasury in creating next generation investment platforms through public-private partnerships, because this is where we're going to get that 1 trillion rand that we need for our economic upgrades or our infrastructure upgrades going forward.
You mentioned in your reply the word politicians. Politician has become a bad word, an insult in many different layers. Nevertheless, I still believe that out there within the youth, there are elements that have to be nurtured and create a new type of ruling class for the world, one that is compromised with the challenges that we have every day, one that understands the meaning of resilience, the meaning of keeping us together. What is your message for that youth out there that we need to have engaged in our political system?
I think the word that I would like to add there now is that we must think of something that adds enduring value. For too long, politicians have extracted value rather than adding value, rather than creating value. So how do we go into a situation where we need politicians because we're living in a world of billions and billions of people, and we have to organize them in some way. They have to cooperate. They have to engage one nation state to another. There's all kinds of complex things that have to happen, transactions that have to happen. So politicians are necessary. That's part and parcel of the way we organize our lives. But what we need to do is have accountable politicians, politicians that are held to account by the electorate. That's the problem. We have a crisis of accountability. And the politicians today have got a very serious problem, in my view, because as the world progresses, as humans grow and as development proceeds at an exponentially changing rate, we have to constantly keep up with those technical innovations. And this becomes an exponential growth. Now, growth in technology is exponential. So what that exponentiality is doing is it's compressing time. And we now have a situation, let's just take, for example, the coronavirus crisis, where we've now got an existential threat facing the entire planet. And your normal election cycle is a 4 or 5 year election cycle. It's not possible to align the requirements of finding a solution for that crisis within that election cycle, given that all countries have got different election cycles. So it's a chaotic, out of synchronized kind of situation. So that's a perfect example now where we need to innovate very rapidly, and we need to create cooperative arrangements. And in this context, just look at what has happened with the advancement of medical knowledge and medical science. The biotechnology has advanced in exponential leaps and bounds. The fact that we could develop a vaccine in 12 months, in a year, whereas other vaccines have taken decades to develop, okay? This is all part and parcel of that exponential growth that we have as a species. And this I think is what politicians need to understand. Politicians can't solve problems. Politicians can only create an enabling environment in which problems can be solved. And I go back to one of my opening statements about the fact that as an individual, I'm insignificant, but as an individual, I can become relevant by being part of a greater whole. And that is my personal philosophy. That came to me as a small boy on the Kalahari Desert, looking up at the stars in the sky and watching the wildebeest and the zebras migrate and feeling as irrelevant as a wildebeest that's going to get eaten by a lion tomorrow. And yet realizing that I'm part of that big flow, part of that big migration, part of the majesty of the of the Milky Way in the heavens above. So I think this is what we need for the future. We need visionary politicians that aren't in it for themselves, that enable others to start finding solutions. And there are many examples of this. And I'll just give one simple example. When early hominids, when early ape men started coming together and starting to learn how to hunt on the savannas of Africa, they had to learn how to sit down around a fire. They learned to control fire, and therefore, because they could control fire, they now had a bit of leisure time. They could cook food and have better nutrition. Therefore, their brains could develop faster. But they also had to develop a language, song, a history, culture. They ask questions about is there life after death, and what is the meaning of life, and is there a God, and all these kind of important questions that grow philosophically. But central to that early development of hominids from ape men into Homo sapiens today was the ability to cooperate and the ability to resolve conflicts within the community. If you can't resolve those conflicts within your small little group of 18 or 20 hunter-gatherers moving across Africa, then your group is not going to be strong enough. It's not going to survive. So the ability to coordinate internally and to resolve internal conflicts, this is a very, very important issue. This is what has made Homo sapiens the principal species on this planet today. Whether you like it or not, that's what it is, and it's simply because we've evolved around the campfire ability to cooperate, to coordinate, to resolve conflict.
Dr. Turton, your words full of wisdom. I really have enjoyed this sharing this time with you. Any last words for our viewers at Embassy Direct?
I think the thing that's happening in South Africa at the moment now, we must not be impatient. We are a young democracy. If you take some of the biggest democracies in the world today, United States of America, look at France as a democracy, look at England as a democracy. These are all very successful democratic states, and all of them have evolved over periods of time, over centuries of time. We are trying to force democracy onto a culture, a multicultural environment where, for some other reason, we've lost respect for each other's cultures. That's not good enough. We are going through a reset, a re-identification of what we are. And the good news that's come out of all of the bad stuff that's happened in the first half of July this year was the amazing resilience of our supply chains, the amazing resilience of ordinary people who could reach out across the traditional cleavage lines of race and class. They could create their sort of self-defense units, whatever you want to call them, their militia, whatever they were. They armed themselves. They were able to confront a very, very dangerous situation with looters and armed people, and they managed to restore law and order on their own without assistance from the state. So this is all remarkable stuff, and I think that South Africa is just a remarkable country. We're the only country in the world where a sitting government negotiated itself out of existence in the best interest of social stability going forward. I think that's remarkable. We're the only country in the world that had a military capability, chemical, biological, and nuclear, that voluntarily relinquished its weapons of mass destruction. No other country that I'm aware of has voluntarily given it up. We're the only country in the world where we had a prisoner of conscience look at his jailer and say, "You, my jailer, are as much a victim of the system as I am." I think that's remarkable. And we're the only country in the world that went through a really deep and very, very difficult period of violence and ultimately reconciliation, where where an environment was created where the perpetrator and the victim could be brought together face to face, and the perpetrator could ask for forgiveness from the victims, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think that's remarkable. Even though many people are unhappy with the outcome of the Truth Commission, ultimately, I think it's a remarkable achievement. So I just like to end off by saying South Africa is a remarkable country. We as South Africans are remarkable people. So we just keep on keeping on. That's what we've got to do, and just never ever lose hope. That's my closing message. Thank you.
Dr. Turton, thanks for your good news. Excellent. Have a nice day. So long.
Thank you very much.